Okie dokie. We're good? We're good. All right. Man, I didn't know it because it was dropped off upstairs while I was doing the show with Stein. My Whitechapel shirt came in. So now I'm wearing my Whitechapel shirt because it's fucking righteous. This is what I've been waiting for. Oh, God. Oh, that's. Oh, this is a cool and beastly looking freaking the Dark Rider over here. So I got this. I got my new Emperor tank top. Um, I got my cool Norsey tank top. I got my whatever it's red tank top. Um, so I've got a good collection of shoulder straps going on over here. All right, so where are we at? So today I wanted to continue to do some reevaluations of the Middle East. Um, and to be honest with you, I'm in part. Um, it is very easy the way we think we understand the situation to look at what you can learn about the Middle East and draw certain conclusions, including conclusions that outside of being a religious fundamentalist, you can't think of any real reasons why you're defending Israel other than, oh, I don't know, they're human beings. All right? Because if the left feels they ought to save all the 12ers in the world, well, then maybe I want to save all of the Jewish Nazis in the world. Okay? How about that? How about that? I get to call them Jewish Nazis, but I am trying to save them because I am looking for their happiness. Because if you look at history, what makes a Nazi happy? That they have, that every race has their nation to themselves. And I think it's fine. You don't want to force integrate certain things. But that's on a social level, it's a bit different. And we still don't understand what the fuck people want. Like, what makes it a horrible idea to just take this open Palestinian land and just make it a thing that's part of Israel? You know? All I'm saying is that you can't do it as your own state. You're never going to have anything better than you had with Yasser Arafat, and he couldn't do it. So I really think that it would serve Palestine better to just, talk about what they need from Israel if that's going to be their choice or whatever, right? I mean, they don't really have too many options. The left doesn't want to talk about why only these 12er Shiite Muslims are so into Palestine, right? Most of this stuff that I've noticed is it's all, and we covered this in prior episodes. It's all coming out of this triangle I think it was Jordan, right? Yeah, like Jordan on the Jordan-Palestinian border, Jordan-Israeli border, and all that. Iran, the entire Islamic Republic, of course, and Yemen. And these hubs are, at the very least, sympathetic to other Shiite-style organizations. ISIS, known as a Shiite organization. There's many things we don't understand about the differences between the different enemies we've been fighting and other things. What we do know is that the Arab Spring was a big part of it. The Arab Spring established the culture that cultivated ISIS. Because political factions aligned with different Western forces were very interested in moving things in certain directions and had certain reasons to work with Shiites. But they also had to get an angle with Shiites. And this is where the Twelvers come in. Which Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi? Is that's his name? Well, you know, the Crown Prince, like his father, I believe is a Shiite, but not a Twelver, right? So, you know, whatever. You know, he's a somewhat of a secular Muslim. Like, good. That's, you know, it's not pagan, but I'll take it. You know, it's like Trump. Like, Trump doesn't run around like his base bitching at the pagans. I you know, like, Ozzy dies and he calls the family up. And granted, they're technically Christian, but that's another example. That's another pagan-friendly Christian family, too, right? Because of the various Christians that need some goddamn wiggle room to have a relationship with the fucking occult and death, because that's fucking healthy. So I wanted to go over this Sykes-Picot Agreement, which is a big part of the rearrangement of the global chessboard after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, because everything about the Middle East as an issue comes from this. You know, the Ottoman Empire was like it seemed like a very neutral part of the world, to be honest. Like, by the time World War I came around, I mean, nobody was sitting there saying, oh, we're worried about the Ottomans today. No, it wasn't quite a thing at the time. Like these were different, like, you know, like each of these empires was like a pocket dimension, right? There's something mystical on the other side of your imagination of it, right? This is why we have this half-baked imagination of steampunk utopia that started off in, you know, the artistic world of the subcultures and science fiction genres that became wildly popular in the fantasy world writing universe, where it became one of the number one, like, cosplay styles. I mean, I fucking love it. You should watch the anime Steam Boy, or Howl's Moving Castle by Miyazaki. Both of those are very steampunk, especially Steam Boy. It's specifically like just a steampunk genre love letter. It's very fucking cool. The Disney paid. I think they had Disney do the distribution or whatever. So whoever did the distribution paid top dollar for the English dub, because there's all sorts of people in it. Hollywood legends. But anyway. Okay, so let's see, we'll hit this, then I shall open that. All right. So I found this, so we're going to read this. And then after we read this, I got a documentary right here which I think it's one of those AI generated documentaries with the cool AI frames and stuff in it. I can't say if any of these pictures are validatable as far as the ones that are showing you certain things like you were in the boardroom, you know. But that's okay. That's just illustrative pictures. Either way, we're gonna go through this because I'm pretty sure this goes through some good details and it doesn't just fluff it on you. Anyway, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, the 15th and 16th of May, 1916. Sir Edward Grey to Paul Cambone, 15th of May, 1916. Excuse me. I shall have the honor to reply fully in a further note to your Excellency, note of the 9th instant relative to the creation of the Arab state. But I should meanwhile be grateful if your Excellency could assure me that in those regions which, under the conditions recorded in that communication, become entirely French, or which French interests are recognized as predominant, any existing British concession rights or navigation or development, and the rights and privileges of any British religious, scholastic, or medical institution will be maintained. His Majesty's government are, of course, ready to give a reciprocal assurance in regard to the British area. Sir Edward Grey to Paul Cambone, 16th of May, 1916. I have the honor to acknowledge the receipt of your Excellency's note of the 9th instant, stating that the French government accept the limits of a future Arab state or confederation of states and of those parts of Syria where French interests predominate, together with certain conditions attached thereto, such as they result from recent discussions in London and Petrograd on the subject. Now, let's understand something about the French, right? Because I'm part French, I understand the heritage. I'm of Norman descent, which the name is North English, but I also have a French grandmother, so probably also French Norman, Germanic Norman as well. Long story short, and my grandmother was a very, very, devout, believer in the whole Catholic realm, if you will. France got hit with the fanaticism first. This is why Gaul is of such consequence to things, and why Charlemagne and France were picked to begin the Christian tyranny of Europe. Okay? There's always that little pagan in me tapping into that time and the horrendous slight, and I'll have my bitter things to say, right? But then, as you look at history, you can find an angle, and you can say, it was wrong of them to do X, Y, and Z, but they also didn't have X, Y, and Z options, and there's a reason why we've come to this point, and why it had to be these people that did it in a time of the Christian authority, right? You have a responsibility to hold ancestral traditions, but also carry them into breakthrough paradigms, right? This is why I like the Black Panther movies. I like the second one too, sue me, right? Because I enjoyed seeing the techno-tribalism, right? Holding ancient customs, traditions, culture, aesthetics, and style, and juicing it to the fucking max with, the best infrastructure, technology, and power that one could understand. Anyway, I have the honor to inform Your Excellency in reply that the acceptance of the whole project as it now stands will involve the abdication of considerable British interests. But since His Majesty's government recognize the advantage to the general cause of the Allies entailed in producing a more favorable internal political situation in Turkey, they are all ready to accept the agreement now arrived at, provided that the cooperation of the Arabs is secured and that the Arabs fulfill the condition and obtain the towns of Homs, Hama, Damascus, and Aleppo. It is accordingly understood between the French and British governments that France and Great Britain are prepared to recognize and protect an independent Arab state or a confederation of Arab states in the areas A and B marked on the annexed map under the suzerainty of an Arab chief, that in Area A, France, and in Area B, Great Britain, shall have priority of right of enterprise and local loans. I don't know if that includes the interests of the Anglo-Iranian agreements, but those are British interests. Why, thus the Anglo. That in Area A, France, and in Area B, Great Britain, shall alone supply advisors of foreign functionaries at the request of the Arab states of Confederation of Arab States. So, you're doing this kind of divide, and how do the French feel about that, right? On a religious level. How does Catholic France, on the movers and shakers level, on the Jesuit-influenced level, care about these circumstances, right? And you have to remember, they've got a script they're adhering to, and they need the risk in the chessboard to line up with events so they can have a total reset and shape the world in whatever image they want, and then reset the moral standard to that image using the same fucking book. Oh, it's an ugly, ugly little grift. And that's why your head's been cracking lately, with all of the Fortean weirdness and the popularity of liminal spaces in pop culture. Anyway. All right, that in the blue area, France, and in the red area, Great Britain. I'm not sure if the thumbnailed map that I chose is reflective of how the map looked that is in reference here. Let me scroll down and see if there's a map on this page. Did they include a map? Where's the map? They didn't give us a map. I will. You know what? I should probably go find the map. Hang on. Okay, we're right here. So let me double check, because this is, I mean, this ought to be, yeah, it's got the blue and the red. Right, okay. Okay. Right. All right, so let me, okay, let me put this on screen. Okay, so here, let's put this on top layer. Thank you. Trying to snag it. Thank you. Okay, so right here is our map. And so this should correspond. So if I go back up here, let me read this again, and you'll be able to see, right? And you can see there's different shades of blue and red, right? So blue is France, red is Great Britain, and here you see the goddamn ridiculous paradigm, right? So French control or French influence, British control or British influence, international control in purple, Russian control in I guess that's deep red. Okay. Okay. All right. British influence, British. So wait, where's British control? Because that's got to be Russian control over here, and okay, I get it. I get it. Okay, so international control. So here's, the Levant, and then you can see the international control right there, right? And so up here, up near Armenia and such, that's got to be Russia. This is not the same shade. That's the lighter shade of red. So Russian control is up here. British control is right here. That's the Anglo-Iranian agreement. British influence is over here, the rest of Iraq, right? This is probably trying to cultivate Sunni. This is probably trying to cultivate Shiite. That's what I'm starting to think, right? From different forces. So it's a question. I don't know the nature of. I'm pretty sure there was a lot of anti Semitic sentiment coming out of that region for a long ass time, right? Let's not pretend there wasn't some sort of resentment for the persecution of Jesus amongst these Christians who, they're just they're reminded of how important it is to not be, bastards like the Pharisees, right? Like those are bad Jews, right? The Pharisees were the bad Jews, right? And I'm not saying that to say they were wrong. I actually also agree that they were not good dudes, because I think we get a whole lot of these brutalist Islamist types coming out of that eventually, right? Because they killed a whole lot of them to destroy their ability to be a threat or fighting force, but there were still enough of them to be in small bands and to go about and do things elsewhere outside of their reach, especially if they were really good grifters or really, really vicious scoundrels. And so there's a lot of questions to ask about where they fall under. All right, so let me read this while you look at the map for context. I'm going to go back up to this first, or this most recent set of points. So it is accordingly understood between the French and British governments that, one, that France and Great Britain are prepared to recognize and protect an independent Arab state or a confederation of Arab states in the areas A and B marked on the annexed map under the suzerainty of an Arab chief. So the marks aren't being seen here on this map. other than perhaps just the markings in general of these territories laid out. That in Area A, France, and in Area B, Great Britain, shall have priority of right of enterprise and local loans. So, yeah, so that would be your deep blue control area and your hard pink or rosé. We'll say this is maybe rosé, and then this is pink where it's influence, but here it's like rosé. Which is funny that I'm using that word because rosé is kind of like Russian, and so this would maybe be rosé, but that's not. That's red. Yeah, but anyway. Okay, that in Area A, France, and in Area B, Great Britain, shall alone supply advisors of foreign functionaries at the request of Arab states or Confederation of Arab States. Right? Right, and this whole area, I mean, like, Saudi Arabia over here is not really affected. Turkey is just what's left of the Ottoman Empire. Effectively, it's just the home of the Turks at that point. And of course, you've got the Italian control, which hasn't been brought up yet. And then Iran has largely nothing to do with it. All right. Shall loan supply advisor. Okay, so 2, that in the blue area, France, and in the red area, Great Britain, shall be allowed to establish such direct or indirect administration of control as they desire and as they may think fit to arrange with the Arab state or Confederation of Arab States. 3, that in the brown area there shall be established an international administration, the form of which is to be decided upon after consultation with Russia and subsequently consultation with other allies and representatives of the Sharif of Mecca. Ah, okay. So the Sharif of Mecca is basically... That's kind of funny. Is he the sheriff? Okay, let me take a look here. Copy. This is a good one. Sharif of Mecca. The Sharif of Mecca was the title of the leader of the Sharifate of Mecca, traditional steward of the Islamic holy sites of Mecca and Medina. The term Sharif is Arabic for noble, highborn, and is used to describe the descendants of Hashim ibn Abd Manaf. The Sharif was charged with protecting the cities and their environs and ensuring the safety of pilgrims for performing the Hajj. Yeah, he's a sheriff. It's the sheriff. They still had a sheriff. Right? They still had a lawman. Yeah, right? And, you know, he's there as a functionary of Islam, right? So this is what's left of inner Ottoman Islam. Right? Or this is what's replacing what inner Ottoman Islam was with whatever has happened since whatever happened, if there was a changeover of leadership. So anyway, the title is sometimes spelled sheriff or the sheriff, with the letter variant used to example by T.E. Lawrence in Seven Pillars of Wisdom. The office of the Sheriff of Mecca dates back to the late Abbasid era until 1200. The Sharifate was held by a member of Hashim clan, not to be confused with the larger clan of Banu Hashim. All right. Look at Wikipedia real quick. Is there a current Sharif of Mecca? Because if it was just him, that means there wasn't an argument, right? There wasn't like, well, wait, what about this religious leader? There's one religious leader involved. All right, so then 1200 list of sharifs of okay. Interesting. Oh, wait. Is that going backwards? 667. No, it's not. Hang on. Luke Empire 1600s. Hold on. Almost there. 1916, 1917. Ali Haydar Pasha. So you had Hussein bin Ali Pasha and Ali Haydar Pasha, who became King Hussein. Flag of the Kingdom of Hejaz, which is black, green, white, and red. Which isn't it interesting? You're noticing a pattern with Palestinian colors. I notice, right? Let me show you what I'm looking at. So what I'm looking at on Wikipedia here. All right. So then Kelly Albin. Okay, so wait, so they did away with the sharifs, is that it? There are no more sharifs? That's interesting. Oh man, so look at this. They keep track of all this shit. So is that it? 1925. And then it's over. What does that mean? Their religion can't have a sharif? Was it not necessary after the Ottoman Empire fell? Was he an Ottoman functionary? Probably because he was an Ottoman functionary, right? So, the Muslim world used to have like a Pope-esque figure, right? When the Roman Empire fell, like the emperor got replaced by the Pope, right? Here that's not happening. Here it's getting replaced by colonies. They're being colonized, right? But yeah, we're talking about the Kingdom of Hejaz, which then ended in 1925. Here's his coat of arms. So this is the end of the bloodline of the Sharif here. That's interesting. You see, like that, when you want to understand when a psychic field of the integrity of someone's world collapses, right? You can see that in bloodline collapses and everything else, right? There's a lot of mythos about the Middle East that is in writing in the 19th century. Fascinating stuff. People were much bigger on conceptualizations of flying carpets and things. And so Hejaz is right here. This is Kingdom of Hejaz is green with the modern day region of Hejaz red outline. Okay, so the kingdom, there's a region of Hejaz, then there's the Kingdom of Hejaz being shown right here. Just south. Okay, so right. So it's Saudi Arabia. So it was a part of Saudi Arabia. That is fascinating. Okay. Anyway, represented as the Sharif of Mecca. So that happens. That's interesting. Why did the Sharif of Mecca matter? and then just for it to come to an end in 1925. 4, that Great Britain be accorded 1, the ports of Haifa and Accra, guarantee of a given supply of water from Tigris and Euphrates in Area A for Area B, His Majesty's government on their part undertake that they will at no time enter into negotiations with cession of Cyprus to any third power without the previous consent of the French government. The Alexandretta shall be a free port as regards the trade of the British Empire, and that there shall be no discrimination in port charges or facilities as regards British shipping and British goods, that there shall be freedom of transit for British goods through Alexandretta and by way through the blue area, whether those goods are intended for or originate in the red area or the B area or Area A, and there shall be no discrimination, direct or indirect, against British goods on any railway or against British goods or ships at any port serving the areas mentioned. Okay, so basically they're going to be like, we just don't beef here, right? We pass through our things like it ain't nothing, right? It's kind of like having reciprocal trade where there's no tariff, right? There's no toll for British shit passing through French waters and vice versa. That Haifa shall be a free port as regards the trade of France, her dominions and protectorates, and there shall be no discrimination in port charges or facilities as regards French shipping and French goods. There shall be freedom of transit for French goods through Haifa and by the British Railway through the Brown area. Whether those goods are intended for or originate in the blue area, Area A or Area B, there shall be no discrimination, direct or indirect, against the French. Right, so that's just making it clear that the French and the British got no beef, right? That in Area A, the Baghdad Railway shall not be extended southwards beyond Mosul, and in Area B, northwards beyond Samarra, until a railway connecting Baghdad and Aleppo via the Euphrates Valley has been completed, and then only with the concurrence of the two governments. How many trains are there in the Middle East? I don't think they work well in the sand. Right? Why were they planning trains? They thought they could get the trains going over the sands? Because I don't think of rail projects when I think of the Middle East. Biggest railroad in Middle East. Okay. Gulf Railway Market in the Middle East. Construction review. I mean, they're building something, allegedly. Nobody talks about this. Why is this not talked about? Is this just local news? You have to go like does Al Jazeera talk about this fucking project? Is this like a real project, or is it like a fucking slush fund? But anyway, so that's my point. There's no trains, so I guess they thought they could master the sands. I don't know how they thought they were going to do it. It is to be understood by both governments that this railway is to facilitate the connection of Baghdad with Haifa by rail, and it is further understood that if the engineering difficulties and expenses entailed by keeping this connecting line in the Brown area only make the project unfeasible, that the French government shall be prepared to consider that the line in question may also traverse the polygon Banias Kais Merib Salkab Tel Ostda Mezmi before reaching Area B. Oh, well, that's simple. For a period of 20 years, the existing Turkish customs tariff shall remain in force through the whole of the blue and red areas as well as in areas A and B, and no increase in the rates of duty or convention from ad valorem to specific rates shall be made except by agreement between the two powers. There shall be no interior custom barriers between any of the above-mentioned areas. Custom duties leviable on goods destined for interior shall be collected at the port of entry and handed on to administration area destination. Okay. It shall be agreed that the French government will at no time enter into any negotiations for cession of the rights and will not cede such rights in the blue area to any third power except the Arab state or confederation of Arab states, without the previous agreement of His Majesty's government, who on their part will give a similar undertaking to the French government regarding the red area. Right, so it seems like there's always been an intention of allowing there to be a confederation to arise. So, it looks like they were not interested in permanent colonies just within this statement alone, right? Which that flips the script on your idea of colonialization when you're talking about a colony that was really more of just like a transitional babysitter waiting for the kids that just lost their empire to grow up. And we don't know if the kids that lost their empire are mature enough to grow up. Anyway, 10. The British and French governments, as the protectors of the Arab state, shall agree that they will not themselves acquire and will not consent to a third power acquiring territorial possessions in the Arabian Peninsula, nor consent to a third power installing a naval base either on the east coast or on the islands of the Red Sea. This, however, shall not prevent such adjustments of the Aden frontier as may be necessary in consequence of recent Turkish aggression. So, of course, that's them worrying about the original Ottomans. So, anyway, negotiations with the Arabs as to the boundaries of the Arab state or confederation of Arab states shall be continued through the same channel as heretofore on behalf of the two powers. It is agreed that measures to control the importation of arms into the Arab territories will be considered by the two governments. I have further the honor to state that in order to make the agreement complete, His Majesty's government are proposing to the Russian government to exchange notes analogous to those exchanged by the latter and Your Excellency's government on the 26th of April last. Copies of these notes will be communicated to Your Excellency as soon as exchanged. I would also venture to remind Your Excellency that the conclusion of the present agreement raises the practical consideration, the question of the claims of Italy to share in any partition or rearrangement of Turkey in Asia, as formulated in Article 9 of the Agreement of the 26th of April, 1915, between Italy and the Allies. His Majesty's government further considers that the Japanese government should be informed of the arrangement now concluded. Okay, there you go. And Japan mentioned for good measure towards the end, which I'm wondering exactly how that factored into their various influences. Because Russian control would be the only part that would have too much to do with them by this point. I mean, I suppose the Strait of Hormuz has got stuff going on, because it kind of is a backdoor for Japan to do things. Yeah, so anyway, okay. All right, so that's the letter. Let's now take a listen in on this. Let me go theater mode.
One dinner party, one pen stroke across a map, and an entire region was placed on a course that still shapes headlines today. In 1916, while the First World War raged and the Ottoman Empire was collapsing, a British diplomat and a French negotiator met in secret. To Arab leaders, they promised freedom and independence. To each other, they promised land and power. Those promises collided. With those conflicting bargains, the fate of the Middle East was rewritten not by battles, but by deception. When the deal was exposed, it shattered trust between Europe and the Arab world and planted seeds of anger that have never fully gone away. Yet here is the part most people miss. The border most often blamed on that secret map was not actually created by it. That hidden twist is the story we are unraveling today on Armchair Archaeology. If you're into slow-burn mysteries and careful map reading, take a second to subscribe. It helps this little corner of history keep asking better questions.
To understand how the lie that created the Middle East took root, we need to look at the Ottoman Empire on the eve of the First World War. For centuries, it had ruled a vast patchwork of peoples, Turks.
I'm 44. I run, I don't drink, I wake up at 5 a.m. I'm still exhausted by noon. The kitchen...
Arabs, Kurds, Armenians, Greeks, and more. It was a world bound together not by one ethnicity, but by imperial authority. By the early 20th century, however, nationalist movements were spreading fast, and European powers were convinced the empire's days were numbered. Politicians in London and Paris mockingly called it the sick man of Europe, afraid...
Now, you see, think about that, right? It was nationalism that destroyed an empire. Because all of these different Arabs, they wanted to have their own independent nations, you know? Now, the question is, what was really stirring the pot with all of that, right? Because, you know, it didn't turn out good for these people when the empire fell, right? And this becomes the same thing that we've always known, which is where an ill-conceived revolutionary generation gets the edge one generation, takes the win, and ruins everything because they were so radical that they alienated themselves from those that produced for their nation. Right? The Shah was not wealthy because he was king. He became king because he is good at being wealthy. If he was not good at being wealthy, they would have deposed him for a better king, which is what happened when his grandpa took over. And you could see, like, you just look at the picture of who the Shah that he overthrew was, right? Like, I think we were looking at this. If we weren't, I was, at the very least, offline somewhere. He was like this fat fuck, right? And so, you know, he completely revitalized Iran and, you know, couldn't get his bid originally to make it a republic. So they, you know, he's a guy who didn't want to be king. He wanted to be like a George Washington, is basically what the Shah wanted to be. But they wouldn't let him be George Washington. That's the Shah. He's the George Washington of modern Iran. And they had the people turn against everything they understood about their traditions, when, for all intents and purposes, they had at the very least, a benevolent king by the existence of government's standards, as that I say as an anarchist, right? So, Shah v. Shah. All right.
That revealed not just contempt, but a hunger to inherit its lands. Yet the Ottoman state was far from dead. In 1914, when it entered the Great War on the side of Germany, it mobilized more than 2.8 million soldiers. Ottoman troops defended the Dardanelles at Gallipoli, where they halted British and French forces in one of the Allies' most humiliating defeats. They held ground in Mesopotamia, forcing Britain into a costly retreat at Kut. They battled across the Sinai, in Palestine, and against Russian armies in the Caucasus. This resilience mattered. From the trenches, it did not look like a sick man at all. Britain and France were already eyeing the empire's lands, but on the battlefield, the Ottomans made every advance costly. The contradiction was striking. An empire dismissed as a dying relic still had the strength to bloody two global powers. That tension set the stage for what followed. Even while Ottoman troops fought with tenacity, diplomats in Europe were already sketching the region's future. The empire's fate was not decided only by victories or defeats at the front, but also by conversations held in backrooms thousands of miles away. And the echoes of those conversations still linger, because the borders they produced remain some of the most contested in the world today.
While Ottoman armies were still fighting on multiple fronts, Britain began searching for allies inside the empire. The figure they turned to was Sharif Hussein of Mecca, a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad and guardian of Islam's holiest sites. For Britain, Hussein seemed like the man who could rally Arab tribes against the Ottomans and open a new front in the war. For Hussein, Britain represented a rare chance to secure recognition for an independent Arab kingdom stretching from the Levant to the Arabian Peninsula. In 1915, a cautious correspondence began between Hussein and Sir Henry McMahon, Britain's High Commissioner in Egypt. Over 10 letters, the two men sketched an understanding. Hussein would launch a revolt if Britain guaranteed Arab independence. McMahon's replies seemed supportive. He wrote that Britain recognizes and supports the independence of the Arabs, with only a few vaguely defined areas excluded.
Where should you invest $100 today? Well, according to Elon Musk, anyone.
To Hussein, this sounded like a commitment strong enough to risk rebellion. The wording, however, was slippery. Entire provinces, like Palestine, were mentioned only obliquely. The northern borders near Syria were described with deliberate vagueness. It was like signing two leases on the same apartment. Both tenants think they own it. London's politicians were careful not to commit too much, leaving loopholes they could exploit later. McMahon's letters promised independence. At the same time, Britain negotiated with France to divide the same territories between themselves. Hussein did not know this. Believing Britain's assurances, he raised the banner of revolt in June 1916. His sons commanded fighters along the Red Sea, striking Ottoman garrisons and sabotaging the Hejaz Railway. T.E. Lawrence, the British officer later immortalized as Lawrence of Arabia, played a supporting role, but the heart of the revolt was Hussein's faith in Britain's word. That faith was a gamble, and the cost of that gamble would shape the future of the Arab world. We're about to spend a lot of time with maps and margins. If you like to puzzle through the past with a warm drink, our ancient secrets.
So you're also catching a certain pattern here of Muslims being duped by Westerners into a false salvation from your own ruling people under the assumption that it'll be great for everybody, or at least most of us, if we ain't got all that anymore, right? And I'm certainly making that assumption in the case of Iran, right? But we've had a very long time to see how this works, and a very long time to understand how you do covert fascism when you are trying to, when you know that it is not popular to do fascist things, right? Because regardless of who you target, right, and the only way that you can dismiss it is you can say, oh, it's not fascism if I'm doing it to you, right? Because the political mindset's not understanding the application of the skill. They're only looking at the targeted individual and basing it on how they feel about the victim. This is one aspect of a discussion, but it is not the primary discussion.
Its mug, Armchair Archaeology Edition, was designed for these exact moments. It's a quiet nod to those hidden lines that change everything. Peek at it in our store. Link is in the pinned comment.
While Hussein's revolt was beginning in the desert, another negotiation was unfolding in Europe. In 1916, Britain and France met behind closed doors to plan how they would divide Ottoman territory once the war was won. Representing Britain was Sir Mark Sykes, a rising politician with ambition but little first-hand knowledge of the Middle East. Across from him sat François-Georges Picot, a career diplomat determined to secure French control of Syria and Lebanon. Their backgrounds were different, but together they drafted one of the most controversial agreements of the 20th century. The deal split the Arab provinces into zones of control. Britain would take southern Mesopotamia, with its oil reserves and access to the Persian Gulf, vital to protect the route to India. France would take Syria and Lebanon, home to fertile farmland and coastal cities it claimed historic ties to. Palestine was marked for international administration, an ambiguous label that pleased neither side but postponed the problem. The polite language of spheres of influence masked the reality. It was not guidance or operation. It was partition by outsiders who had no authority to give away what was not theirs. The way they drew the map revealed how little they understood the lives inside it. With charts spread across the table, Sykes and Picot used a ruler to sketch straight lines over deserts, rivers, and mountains. One boundary ran from Acre on the Mediterranean to Kirkuk in Mesopotamia, cutting through regions that had been connected for centuries by trade and kinship. What looked tidy in Paris and London was a fracture line waiting to happen.
It takes 90 seconds for this NASA-engineered AC cool down your room. It's smaller than a toaster. AC. This
At the very moment Britain was assuring Sharif Hussein of Arab independence, it was secretly tying itself to France. In private, entire societies were reduced to bargaining chips. In public, promises of liberation continued. That duplicity left wounds that would shape the Middle East for generations.
For months, the Sykes-Picot Agreement remained a carefully guarded secret, locked in the archives of London and Paris. Sharif Hussein and the Arab fighters who had risen against the Ottomans believed Britain's promises of independence were still intact. They had no idea.
Now remember this. The Young Turks were the worm tongue of the Ottoman Empire. Right? And you have now a media organization in the United States and the West called the Young Turks. And so, you know, if you can sell that as being a revolutionary media machine, I suppose, sure. But there's a question of okay, was the world just everybody was just trying to conquer each other anyway? So like as long as all the empires are calling for war, it's okay to be warful and scoundrelly to other empires, and you know, because it's like football, right? And so like it's just the persistent, ever ongoing football game. And so the decorum in this as such is acceptable because only the people on the field are killing each other and you're rivals, but you actually just really like each other, right? Because war is a corruption of an entire practice that, you know, goes back to some fertility cult stuff. And before there was violence in the world. And so there used to be bloodless combat sports as both an athletic competition, but as well as in general how you settled impassioned disputes between regions in a way where everything in the law is self-evident. There will be a satisfactory settlement judgment based on who wins this combat sport thing as the demonstration of their strength and wit meets the need to have this thing that they want, and don't worry about it because we're not going to let you suffer just because you have to give up, right? It's this kind of thing, right? Because there's rational minds on each side of the dispute that just have come to a certain impasse in their understanding and had to appeal to a higher authority who set the terms of a particular challenge. Right? So, as a conspiracy theorist, I worry about the people that carry these traditions. You want to carry that spirit of the Young Turks. And I don't necessarily know that the Ottomans were particularly a bad, rulership. Maybe they're just judging the Ottoman security organization harshly, the way they judged the Shah's Savak harshly. I would reinstall I'd reinstall the Savak out of spite. Right? It'll be handed over to the Republic of Iran, the secular Republic of the Lion and the Sun. You can have I suppose there's a Shah loyalist kind of thing, right? At the end of the day, as a king, you're going to be about the overall guidance of political matters, but that's it, and it's just the national interest for peace and whatever, and then that leads on you have a chance here to make a constitution a little bit like America's, right? I mean, you don't got states, you got provinces, so you don't have to do, I suppose you don't have to do the whole federation system or confederation. You don't need any of that. So I don't know if the right thing to do is parliamentary because of that. But what I do know is that you got a chance to give your country separation of powers. The corruption in the United States is fucking absurd, yes. But there's so much goddamn competition within that circle of vultures that they have a hard time getting anything that fucks you over to be ultra solid. And the minute you give it just enough psychic pushback, it fucking withers on the fucking vine. Because of a baseline of who people really are and what being brought out to light cannot tolerate such awfulness of what it is. And that protects you. They don't want to bring their harm into your personal space when you're as awake as someone like me, because I can expose it in real time. It's part of what protected me when I had to go to the hospital and get my kidney stones removed and not worry about getting fucking vaccinated while being put under. I did all the things I needed to do, said all the things I needed to say. And took extra suffering just for good measure. So, you tell me what is an Odinic sacrifice, because I think the way I handled that kidney stone counts a little bit. Just a little frickin' bit. All right, let's get back to this.
Idea that the borders of their hoped-for nation
had already been traded away in secret. That secrecy collapsed in late 1917 when the Russian Empire fell. The Bolsheviks, who seized power in Petrograd, opened the Tsar's diplomatic files and found copies of the Allies' secret treaties. Determined to expose the hypocrisy of imperial powers and to encourage revolution abroad, they published the agreements in full. Among them was the Sykes-Picot map, which showed Britain and France casually dividing Arab lands like spoils of war. Within weeks, the details appeared in European newspapers, and soon the revelations spread to Cairo, Damascus, and Baghdad. Then, boom, the map was out. The reaction was immediate and bitter. Arab leaders who had trusted Britain now saw written proof that independence had never been on the table. For ordinary fighters, news of the leak spread by rumor and by leaflet.
Yeah, these are consequences. Realities of a world order dawning upon you when it's too late. This is what happened when the Panama Papers were revealed. It showed a whole manner of the international market and how it was being centrally controlled without the interest in keeping the public aware of these important matters of how the nature and the character of the world is moving and shifting about, and thus condemning us to an acceptance of things that we never actually consented to. You just told us about it, but you didn't need an implicit confirmation. You just needed me to laugh at a joke, and that was good enough for you. Right? And that gets into the whole manner of satanic mockery as they convey their liability shield, which is their karmic buffering system. And they didn't think anybody was going to be able to break that. And some of us have, and that's why there's so many of them suffering. We've done some extraordinary shit, and let's not make too much of it, because I don't know how extraordinary it really is. It could be a moot point, because what the fuck did Peter Thiel just leave the country for, right?
And it felt like a betrayal carved in ink. The revolt that had begun in hope now carried the weight of disillusionment. In London, officials scrambled to explain. Some claimed the document had been misunderstood, others that it was only a preliminary draft. The map, however, left little room for denial. In Paris, leaders defended the deal openly, insisting that France's rights in Syria and Lebanon were legitimate and non-negotiable. The exposure changed everything. From that moment forward, Arab trust in the West was damaged beyond repair. The war continued, but suspicion shadowed every alliance. Like modern document leaks that change public faith in governments, the revelation of Sykes-Picot reshaped perceptions overnight and became a turning point in Middle Eastern memory.
When the First World War ended in 1918, the Ottoman Empire finally collapsed. Its Arab provinces no longer belonged to Istanbul, but they were not free either. Instead, they were placed under what the League of Nations called the Mandate System. In theory, this was meant to guide local peoples towards self-government. In reality, it gave Britain and France new legal cover to take control of the lands they had already divided in secret. Britain received mandates over Iraq, Transjordan, and Palestine. France took Syria and Lebanon. Though these were not called colonies, the two powers ruled them in much the same way. Administrators were appointed, European officials dominated key offices, and foreign armies enforced order. To many Arabs, the language of mentorship and preparation sounded hollow. What they saw on the ground looked and felt like occupation.
Dad, what do you actually do at work? Project man.
The League's rhetoric captured the contradiction. Its charter described mandates as a sacred trust of civilization, suggesting benevolence and moral duty. But the reality was that Britain controlled oil fields, trade routes, and ports, while France oversaw tax collection, school curricula, and local armies. Far from preparing independence, the system deepened dependence.
Now, there's a question of how much self-sufficiency did an empire give their people, right? Like, how many of these men were just anything above, like, a serf? Like, what was the robustness of their intelligence? What was left over of people capable of governing themselves when this was over? That's the big question, right? Because are you forcing people that have never known anything but being a peasant in an empire to putting them in freedom without any knowledge of how anything works, right? And so it's like an empire breaks apart and now they're living like the Native Americans in the 19th century. Except it's the 20th century for them. But, they're in their 19th century because they're on horseback, but they've also got some, like, trucks, right? And it's still like that. There's people on camel and horseback because, God damn it, there's not that many places you can drive the truck. Right? And they need certain things to go certain places, right? And so, like, the wealthy people are inherently going to be who you're going to have to pick from. Because you're going to have to know what it takes to make money when you are a private person. And do otherwise, right? Or, you get, like, these kings or whatever, right? Like, how did they, which I think was a British decision, how did they set things up for the House of Saud? Right? The House of Saud is a British thing.
The new borders also created fragile states. Iraq was stitched together from 3 Ottoman provinces with little shared history, binding Sunnis, Shias, and Kurds in one political unit. Lebanon was cut from Syria to give Christians a majority, even though many Muslims resented the arrangement. These decisions were not accidents. They reflected the priorities of London and Paris, not the aspirations of local peoples. For many in the Arab world, the mandates confirmed what the leaked Sykes-Picot map had already suggested. The war had not brought liberation. It had only replaced Ottoman authority with a European version of empire dressed in new language.
And, you gotta wonder, why the hell did Christianity not take off where it started? It just goes into the north way more, right? You've got the most consequential lore about Christianity in the Middle East and the South. We can talk about Ethiopia all fucking day, right? But as far as where the ethos took over in the population, agreeably, yeah, right? So, these programs were, I talked about the French and the radical French, right? There's something we fundamentally don't understand about the Middle East. Christianity, Islam seems to be way more appealing, and I don't think there's any way you can shuffle the fucking shit going on top, right? And I think that Frank Herbert understood this. And put a thing together based on it, right? And he made sure to distinction two different sets of Fremen. Fremen of the North and Fremen of the South. And of course the Fremen of the South are they're the hardcore motherfuckers, right? It's always the South that's got the hardcore motherfuckers. The ones that are not so friendly as the ones you've been getting acquainted to in the book thus far, right? These are the Alwa Akbar types. You let them, you don't wake that dragon unless you're really ready to ante up your civilization, right? And that's part of my concerns in America, right? Because a lot of right-wing leaning people are doing a lot to be genuinely intelligent, genuinely witty. They might even have some good wisdom and the belief in their good intentions, right? And with a scary level of mythological thinking of their own, because there's my kind of mythological thinking and the living mythos of my life, and then there's the living mythos of a radicalized fundamentalist. So you bet your fucking ass. You bet your fucking ass I'm all for the Shah. All right, you bet your fucking ass. Right? I don't know exactly what Israel cares about happens to America. I just know where all of their fingers are in the sauce, and I also know that their nation is acting upon an agreed global system, and that I am not going to scapegoat any people over this kind of fucking thing. If it's all the same to them, just leave me out of it. Just be happy that I agree with the broken clock today, and that's about all I have to say, is that the broken clock is on time right now. And you still have to answer for what seems like the horrible things that you've had to do. It's only fair. Not even in a prosecutorial. I'm just saying we gotta have a goddamn really honest conversation. Right? A demonstration of empathy, even though they've perhaps done some horrendous evil, but, at least you can feel bad maybe for their grandparents and be like, oh, I'm so sad because of that's why I keep saying, you guys got a fucking raw deal. That's all I can say is that it's a raw deal. Exoterically, you looked at that and I don't know why you took that fucking deal. Right? Maybe because the issue of anti-Semitism wasn't addressed until afterwards, right? Just like the issue of racism after the Civil War was not going to be handled until afterwards, We didn't even go into the war to liberate slaves. That was done in the middle of the fucking war as a demoralization move at that point. And so, we have to retroactively deal with the trauma we inflict upon groups of people whom we abused and exploited, especially during transitional moments and when we needed to use them to invent narratives. They would find a handful of punishments that were done to a slave, and then they didn't tell you what the slave provably did. And it's just as horrible as what a free man would have done, who was of a certain kind of person in a certain kind of state. And I don't mean a state like a government, I mean a state of being, right? I'm trying to be as general about this as possible because that is the truth of it. It has nothing to do with anything else. But there are serious issues in which there's a lot of healing, deep ancestral healing, that our brothers of the southern races, the dark skinned races, need to heal. That's their inward journey. That's what they got to check out. And it's usually a different vibe check than where I'm at. And I'm going to let them have their vibe because it's a deep place to get there that requires having a lot more loving knowing of who they are historically, ancestrally, so on and so forth. And then being sure that you understand the temperament of the people that you're with. Anyway.
If moments like this leak make you sit back and whisper, "No way," you can fuel future deep dives with a super thanks. It keeps the research going and helps us unpack the next hidden archive. Once Britain and France secured their mandates, they faced the task of turning territories into states. The decisions were rarely made in the region itself. They were made in offices in London, Paris, and Geneva, where maps were spread across tables and boundaries were sketched with pencils and rulers. These borders looked neat to the men drawing them, but they cut across landscapes, communities, and histories that did not fit into straight lines. Iraq is a clear example. Before the war, it existed as 3 separate Ottoman provinces: Basra in the south, Baghdad in the center, and Mosul in the north. Each had its own elites, its own networks of trade, and its own mix of faiths. Britain decided to combine them into a single state under a Hashemite monarch. This created a patchwork of Shia Arabs, Sunni Arabs, and Kurds, groups with competing interests now expected to live under one political framework. The divisions baked into Iraq's foundation would haunt it for the rest of the century. France applied the same logic in Syria. To secure its position, it divided the territory into multiple units: Damascus, Aleppo, the Alawite state, the Druze state, and Lebanon. The creation of Lebanon gave
You know, I find it interesting at this one place called Ursul. And Ursu and Mosul, those are very close to words that Frank Herbert uses in Dune, too, right? And Iraq and Arrakis and all that stuff right? I mean, and everybody knows that he studied this period of time. Um, I always loved the imperial costume aesthetics in the Lynch Dune. Very appropriate for demonstrating this period of time with the fall of the Ottoman Empire. The fall of one world order into another and the whole thing. And it does explain 20th century reality for Arab people.
Units: Damascus, Aleppo, the Alawite state, the Druze state, and Lebanon. The creation of Lebanon gave Christians a majority, but it also ensured that Muslims felt excluded. Rather than building unity, these boundaries encouraged communities to compete for influence and protection. Officials sometimes spoke about these frontiers as if they were drawing property lines on an estate map, not shaping the lives of millions. The straight edges ignored trade routes, kinship networks, and seasonal migrations that had tied the region together for centuries. The result was a set of states with fragile foundations. The tidy lines that pleased diplomats in Europe created fault lines that still crack open in conflicts today.
This professional 32 TW SSD capable of holding...
Hang on. There we go.
...to drop $1,000.
The mandate system was presented as a path to independence, but people across the Arab world quickly saw it for what it was: empire under a new name. Disappointment turned to defiance, and in the 1920s, uprisings erupted against both Britain and France. These were not minor disturbances. They were broad movements that revealed how deeply the sense of betrayal had sunk. In Iraq, the frustration boiled over almost immediately. In 1920, tribal leaders, clerics, and...
Now, by the way, this is also very interesting in context to what we learn about the state of the Middle East in the 60s or so, right? There's almost no population there. They're importing labor, right, on a grand scale, right? So there's just a whole lot of nomads and stuff that don't want to have nothing to do with it. They're not massive populations, but this is your quote Fremen. And then you've got from the near regions import coming in for the new governments or royal families or whatever, and everything that holds them together and their military force, and that's about it. So it's mostly a government and its people and its military, and then its national economic interests, like the oil industry and such, and just in general all the industries. And they pay, they pay a due to Britain or France, right? And I think that there's just something that we don't understand, because although this was done poorly, the general concept is not a bad idea if you're talking, if you had drawn the map up in a way that addresses everything that this just talked about how it was completely insensitive to just the natural flow of life that gave, people like what they cared about and their meaning and all that stuff, right? And there's literally no reason why we don't just shift that up. You can't just call these Arab leaders and say, like, hey, listen, man, we want to kind of like redo all these different things, and we want to make sure all you guys are happy with with stuff, right? And so I want you to introduce these conversations to be discussed over a 1-year period. Like, we'll have an agreement about a thing right now, but let's have a discussion about this and come back in a year's time of your country having a national debate about whether they like this proposal or not, which involves redrawing all the lines to something that gave a fuck about what you were looking for after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, because it does feel like a shame that we're betraying these people because nobody's giving us a good reason why we've done this to them, right? You can't just make a good reason for it. And so it makes us feel like, you know, we were the bad guys and you're covering up for it. And maybe you know, and then this gets into those who would scapegoat the benefactors of the Levant.
Former Ottoman officers united in revolt against British rule. Tens of thousands joined in, and the rebellion spread rapidly from the countryside to the edges of Baghdad. Britain was caught unprepared and had to deploy massive reinforcements to regain control. For the first time in the region, airplanes were used systematically to bomb villages, a shocking spectacle of modern technology turned on civilians. The death toll was enormous, and the memory of foreign aircraft overhead became a lasting symbol of domination. In Syria, resistance culminated in the Great Revolt of 1925. Druze fighters ignited the uprising, soon joined by Sunnis from Damascus and peasants from rural areas. The French response was devastating. They bombarded Damascus, reducing entire neighborhoods of the ancient city to rubble. Survivors carried the memory of smoke and ruins as proof that French promises of guidance masked naked coercion. Even in Palestine, where the mandate was still new, early protests erupted against British policies. Communities recognized that the future being built for them was not independence, but another form of control. These uprisings were ultimately crushed, yet their significance endured.
Now remember, some of these people in the West they have secret agreements with the globalists to encourage people to go to communism because of those in the bidding war between capitalism and communism, and dismissing the free market, right? You know, because the communist wants to destroy capitalism, and then it will never allow you to establish yourself in a free market, which the capitalists are also stopping you from doing, right? And I have to say it like that now that I understand that, you know, you shouldn't call yourself a capitalist if you want to fight communism. It's not a right word for it because it's their word. It traps it into their core definition. From a French communist, by the way. See, the French traded their radicalism for the religion to the antithesis of that, right? Because the French were going through their own shame over a period of time, over their own feelings of guilt from what they did when they were radicals. And they're falling into the trap of punishing themselves instead of breaking that karma properly. They are actually reinforcing the karma in the ritual torture of themselves, because they're accepting certain lies of their personal blame in it and projecting that into their whole society to say, we need to take this hit, right? And maybe if it was a faulty religious reason, I mean, how it depends on how propaganda was selling something, right? Like, you know, we look back and we have a tremendous amount of shame about the Vietnam War. We hate ourselves as Americans for the Vietnam War. You don't know how much we hate ourselves. And that's why the Iranian Revolution worked. Because we weren't gung-ho, like we lost that spirit in Vietnam. Because we, you know, the people we trusted foolishly sold us out to people that wanted communism to win. And they're always doing that. And it's always painful to watch in real time when you were able to figure it out before it started happening, what it would be like if it started happening, and now you can fucking see it because you had a glimpse into how it happened to them, right? That's what we've learned since 2020. And many of you have adopted great wisdom in the last 6 years. And, but I don't trust all of you. Some of you are very wise, but we are split on other matters. Because we don't live in a very simple world anymore. Right? Not all people that accept 9/11 as an inside job are going to be my friend. Some people, that statement falls into an entirely different conclusion of the facts. And those people can often be a bit narcissistic and get very defensive of their assumption of what they know. And this is when they get belligerently rude with you and they can't let you fucking speak. Because they have to correct a statement you made before you can explain it. And you're trying to let them know, just let me explain myself, because, maybe I'm not using exactly the right word for it. The explanation will clear up what I mean by that statement, and then you will have helped me a great deal. But let me get it out, right? If I can't get through that with somebody, it means that they don't respect what I have to say, and that makes me pretty angry because it's rude. It's insulting and it's rude. And I won't tolerate it because I'm very protective of my self-fucking respect. It's very simple. And if you don't think I deserve it, that's fine. I don't need your respect either. You are free to insult me, and I am free to be away from your insults. These are the most essential things that keep peace in a civil society. And men can disagree to near violence, but don't.
They showed that the peoples of the Middle East would not accept foreign-drawn borders without a fight. Each revolt left behind martyrs, memories, and a deepened mistrust of European powers that would shape politics for generations.
The new borders and mandates did more than replace one empire with another. They hardened old rivalries and created new ones, shaping politics for the next century. In Iraq, 3 Ottoman provinces with little shared history were stitched into a single state. Sunnis, who were a minority, filled many of the most powerful positions in the army and government. Shia, who made up the majority, were sidelined. Kurds in the north, with their own language and culture, were incorporated.
But they say that, but what does that mean precisely, right? Like why did they immediately go and put them in those positions, right? They may have been aligned with certain agreements, but what were they really interested in doing for everything, and the good reason why the others couldn't? right? Because if the agenda of the state was not going to be in alignment with their values, and if you were to have heard their values, you would have been perhaps horrified because of what they believed in and stuff, right? Because I certainly have a firmer understanding of what, like, say, Al-Qaeda in its narrative was looking for, as far as who were getting duped into being a part of Al-Qaeda to justify the war on terror, who these people were that were getting into it and wanting to be a part of that, because that's coming from a more Sunni place. And the Shiite stuff I don't quite understand yet, right? Because it seems like only these 12ers are it. And I do believe there's a handful of other kinds of Shiites. And, you know, the Sunnis, it's the Wahhabist schools. They produce their most radical types. They have, I believe, a lot of influence in the House of Saud. But also, as I understand it, the House of Saud has been going through a lot of reform because of a damn good relationship with the president. I'm pretty sure that the president can't fuck up his relationship with the House of Saud. Because, I mean, like, I've always perceived the House of Saud as at least, like, a competent, typically civil government, you know, like, if the conflict in Yemen is a big extension of what Iran is, then obviously what they're doing in Yemen is of the same level of approval as Israel gives to everything else on the British side of the equation. It's a fascinating game being played out there in the sands. It's the most terrible sandbox you've ever heard of. I'd rather play in the Chinese sandbox. There's not as much war over there.
Separated into a state that gave them little recognition. These imbalances simmered beneath the surface, waiting for crises to erupt.
EVE Online is a vast universe.
In Syria and Lebanon, French administrators carved the region into smaller units to secure control. Lebanon was created to ensure a Christian majority, while Syria was divided into Alawite, Druze, and Sunni majority areas. On paper, this looked like careful management. In practice, it encouraged communities to see themselves as rivals, competing for French favor. The role of minorities became especially significant. The French relied heavily on Alawites and Druze for recruitment into their colonial army, giving them opportunities denied to others. Christians in Lebanon were granted political privileges that outlasted the mandate itself. These choices deepened sectarian divides and left communities mistrustful of each other. The consequences were long-lasting. The Alawite foothold in the Syrian military eventually helped bring the Assad family to power. Lebanon's delicate sectarian balance produced decades of instability, including a civil war that lasted from 1975 to 1990. In Iraq, the exclusion of Shia and Kurds became a recurring fault line, visible again in the chaos that followed the 2003 U.S. invasion. The mandates were sold as preparation for self-rule. In reality, they were blueprints for division. The structures built in the 1920s still shape the conflicts and mistrust we see in the region today. Where do you think the turning point really was?
The ruler on the map, the leak in 1917, or the way mandates were enforced afterward? Drop your theory below. Reading your angles is my favorite part of making these.
The borders drawn after the First World War were never just lines on paper. They became the framework within which nearly every major conflict of the modern Middle East has unfolded. Iraq's instability, Syria's civil war, Lebanon's political paralysis, and the ongoing crisis in Palestine all bear the imprint of decisions made in London and Paris a century ago. In Iraq, divisions built into the state's foundations repeatedly resurfaced. The Sunni-led government of Saddam Hussein marginalized Shia Arabs and Kurds, fueling uprisings that scarred the country. When the United States invaded in 2003, the same fractures reappeared. Sectarian militias and separatist movements filled the vacuum, echoing divisions first created when 3 Ottoman provinces were forced into one country. In Syria, the legacy of French rule also endured. By favoring minorities like the Alawites in the military, France tilted the balance of power. Decades later, that imbalance helped the Assad dynasty rise to dominance. When protests erupted in 2011, the fault lines deepened into a civil war that still bears the marks of sectarian mistrust and rival claims to legitimacy. Lebanon's political system is another inheritance of the Mandeq period. Its government is still organized around a fragile balance between Christian, Sunni, and Shia communities, an arrangement that has led to repeated deadlocks. The 15-year civil war from 1975 to 1990 was one eruption of that instability, and the country's repeated crises since then show how fragile the system remains. Palestine, meanwhile, became the arena where Britain's contradictory promises collided most violently. The consequences of those promises continue to dominate global headlines. The Sykes-Picot Agreement did not alone create these problems, but it remains the symbol of foreign powers imposing borders that ignored local realities. Its legacy lives on, not in dusty archives, but in the conflicts that still dominate the news today.
Sykes-Picot has become a byword for betrayal. When people talk about artificial borders in the Middle East, they often point to that 1916 agreement as the moment the map was created. In popular imagination, nearly every frontier in the region can be traced to a ruler held by Sykes and Picot. The truth is more complicated. The agreement itself was not a finished blueprint for modern states. It was a wartime bargain, designed to reassure Britain and France that they would both benefit from the Ottoman collapse. The famous line from Acre to Kirkuk, often reproduced in textbooks, was never enforced as an actual frontier. After the war, the map was revised again and again as diplomats, generals, and administrators adapted to uprisings and shifting priorities. In the early 1920s, Britain combined Basra, Baghdad, and Mosul into the new state of Iraq and created Transjordan under a Hashemite prince. France reorganized Syria multiple times, first splitting it into smaller states, then reuniting them when division proved unworkable. Palestine's boundaries were influenced less by Sykes and Picot than by the Balfour Declaration of 1917 and the waves of conflict that followed. If the actual lines change so often, why does the myth of Sykes-Picot endure? Partly because it captures the arrogance of the moment. 2 European officials sat at a table, dividing lands they barely knew, with no regard for the people who lived there. Later generations, from Arab nationalists in the 1950s to militant groups in the 21st century, invoked the agreement as a symbol of foreign domination. The borders of the modern Middle East were not created in one night in 1916. They emerged from years of improvisation.
Best way to unclog your arteries? Cut out salt? Nope. Take blood. Dash diet? Nope. Hold on.
Bargains and betrayals. But the power of the Sykes-Picot story lies in what it represents, the sense that the region was treated as a chessboard by outsiders.
We began with the image of 2 diplomats sketching lines across a map in 1916. The Sykes-Picot Agreement became infamous as the lie that created the Middle East. But here is the twist. The border most often blamed on that secret deal was not part of it at all. The jagged lines separating Jordan from Iraq,
sometimes nicknamed Winston's Hiccup, was drawn years later, in the early 1920s. At a conference in Cairo, Winston Churchill chaired discussions on how to manage Britain's mandates. A widely repeated story says that when he sketched the frontier on a map, his hand slipped, leaving a kink that later became official. What people assume was created by Sykes and Picot was in fact Churchill's quick improvisation. This detail matters because it reveals a larger truth. The Middle East was not created in one night by two diplomats. It was reshaped again and again by negotiations, betrayals, and hurried adjustments. Sykes-Picot was the opening chapter, but the borders we know today were the result of decades of improvisation. Each layer left behind tensions that continue to shape the region's politics and conflicts. So, was the Middle East made by Europeans, or was it already reshaping itself from within? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think today's struggles were born in 1916, or are we oversimplifying a much deeper history? If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss the next investigation.
All right. So that's the video clip. And yeah, I think at the end of the day, we probably had such an alien relationship to understanding them, probably because there's so much nuance within the languages they were speaking, and how different their script was, that we just, we were looking at the Arab world like as a whole organism, and not like looking at the organs of the organism and saying, let's not cut through the heart, let's maybe bypass it and run around this lung right over here. We loop this way, we can get around the kidneys, and here's a simple, there probably were some really easy border agreements that could have been designed, right? There could have been a whole lot done that would have made people happy, right? So it's a question of what happened to the Sharif, right? Because the Sharif does this whole thing, and I think a lot of people know that story and everything else too, right? So the story of like the last Sharif, maybe something I do in a future stream. All right, so I think that's good for tonight. It's been a good long show. Tim Timony popped in. Hi, Tim. Thank you so much. All right. That's another one on deconstructing the Middle East situation, and I think when this situation in Iran somehow comes to an end, even if we don't fucking win, if Iran's not making anybody else's borders change at the end of whatever this is, then I think we ought to go and have a big conference with the Middle East, and maybe give them what we promised them as the West. Work really hard to have a certain kind of partnership. Nobody gets to have a Durka culture. No Durka Muslims, right? Well, we will tone it down with our fundamentalists, but you can't have your fundamentalists. I mean, you can, you have to. I mean, that's what you got them there. We have ours here, but they can't be running the show. But that'll be a private agreement, because you're gonna have to let some politicians pretend to be one of them and betray them. You know how the game works, right? So you do that kind of thing. That's not going to fly in Iran because the 12ers have gone way too far. They're fucked. The people are a hair trigger away from hunting them down like dogs. They're just waiting for the right moments. But anyway, all right, that's it. I'm gonna catch you guys later.